Good evening, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called Macduff Lives. And tonight we are reading, I'll be reading from Rulers of Evil by Tupper Saucy. The really amazing historical account that traces the effect of the Jesuits upon the creation of the United States and a lot of what's happened since then. And thank you for being with me tonight. Hello, Dust Bunny, Linda, Being, Gary, and Zag are all here. Yeah. Well, you just happy if you can't read history, just sit back and listen, and I'll read it for you because it's it's my pleasure, really. I'm happy to have these books to read and to share them with you. And we've got about 10 of them now back on the book train that Jumpin' Mouse has kept repopulating with all of our book readings over at screamingospreys.com and screamingospreys.com, where you will find Screaming Ospreys TV. 4 full channels going 24/7 with some of the programming that I've selected that I think is really, really important so you can absorb it on your own time. That's at screamingospreys.com. Pardon me a second. Mm. Deep Great Falls. Are you from Deep Great Falls, Virginia or Maryland, up there north of me? Because I was reading about that area last night where Colonel John Addison had built a fort as part of the Rangers patrols that they had built about 3 or 4 forts stretching from Great Falls, where we call it now. They called it Little Falls then, and then all the way across to Annapolis. And those Rangers were the heads of what became the militia. Anyway, that was back in the 1680s we were reading about last night in Captains and Mariners of Early Maryland by Raphael Sims. 1937 publication from Johns Hopkins University Press. Very interesting source. And it's just a really fun book. Lots of stories in it that are historically true, and they fit into the real history that we've been studying. Local history fits with regional and national and international history. It does fit. It's just hard to make those connections. So it takes some time. Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Just a Root, Joseph, Linda, and Andy is here running the boards. Hello, Andy. Yeah, Andy waves at me from the green room. Okay. Well, we're all set to get going with our reading tonight. It's part 7 we're up to of Rulers of Evil by Tupper Saucy, and we are at page 101, down at the bottom where we were just talking about Quakers. Yes, Quakers. Remember the Quaker Oats commercial? That is the theory of the shot from guns. Boom. Yeah. I don't think the Quakers were into shooting guns. I never understood that. But they have found a haven across the Atlantic in the colony conveniently granted by King Charles II to William Penn, one of the most outspoken English Quakers. Charles granted the land to settle a debt that the crown owed to Penn's deceased father, Admiral Penn. Knowledgeable contemporaries charged the younger Penn with being a Jesuit in disguise, quote unquote. Well, that's not what you read in the history book, is it? It's one of my speed bumps where I read something and I have to stop. I have to say, wait a minute, there's new information here. Put that into the memory bank. Contemporaries called William Penn a Jesuit in disguise. Well, we know the Jesuits went in disguise. It's an interesting idea, anyway. Actually, all Catholic clergy in England were, to a certain extent, in disguise, thanks to a law prohibiting Roman Catholics from wearing clerical garb. Well, promulgated with the intent of handicapping popery, the law might well have been written by Jesuits, as it effect reduced the Jesuit profile to nothing, the level preferred by covert militias. 18th century London was teeming with disguised Jesuit missionaries trained at places like Saint Omer in moral theology, that is, casuistry, equivocation, and mental reservation, as well as espionage, cloak and dagger diplomacy, guerrilla tactics, and the manipulation of public opinion. Hello, Edward Bernays. Hello, Walter Lippmann. Hello, 20th century. William Penn's higher education began at Cardinal Wolsey's endowment for the furtherance of papal supremacy, Christ Church College at Oxford. Another interesting idea that Wolsey endowed Christ Church College at Oxford, the effect of which was to further the doctrine of papal supremacy in Oxford, in England, long after Henry VIII, right? Interesting. Before completing Oxford, Penn was sent by his father to the small University of Somme in France. Penn left Somme an accomplished propagandist, less interested in achieving specific biblical objectives, quote, much reading is an impression to the mind, unquote, than in establishing illuminated social justice. Oh no, social justice! Who likes social justice? Where is Greta? Through reason and natural understanding. His most influential work, the pamphlet No Cross, No Crown, published in 1669, agitated for Quaker separatism. Charles II readily accommodated Penn's agitations by launching the Great Persecution of 1682, which created enormous migrations of die-hard Protestants and Catholics alike to the American colonies. If Penn was not the Jesuit he was believed to be, he was at least a rather superior Jesuit product, another in a long train of princes, designated, quote, proprietor in Penn's case, deferring to the Quakers' dislike for titles of nobility. Well trained to populate, administer, and defend their land grants in obedience to the will of the grantor. Penn's example and Franklin's after him inspired Franklin's esteemed Masonic brother, Jean-Francois Arouet, better known as Voltaire, a founder of the Enlightenment, to memorialize Quakers as the noblest kind of born-again European. Just a footnote, William Penn's pamphlet, No Cross, No Crown, 1669, echoes a famous statement from King James I, no bishop, no king. So what he's saying is that as the King of England recognized that without bishops, you can't be the king. The bishops are essential. You can't run a kingdom without a religion, and the bishops are the ones that know how to work the people. And without the bishops on your side, you won't be the king. Well, now William Penn is just reflecting that a couple generations later when he says no cross, no crown, meaning that without the cross, without Quaker Christianity, then there will be no king either, threatening Charles II. So Charles II persecutes them, driving them to America just like they were doing to the Catholics at the same time. This is where we have Tupper Saucy's wheels turning, thinking, aha, that's what the plan is. Yet well-informed Englishmen saw neither Quaker nor regeneration in Penn's curiously compromising friendship with James II, who succeeded Charles II in 1685. What possible league could a Quaker have with a king? Worse, a king converted to Roman Catholicism by the Jesuits. We're talking about James II now. Certainly no true Quaker could have written Penn's charter for the city of Philadelphia, which amounted to his gift of that estate to the Church of England. Wow. The city of Philadelphia was given by William Penn to the Church of England? I didn't know that. That wasn't in my history book. Which amounted to his gift of that estate to the Church of England. In the charter's preamble, Penn stated, I have, by virtue of the king's letters patent, under the great seal of England, erected the said town into a borough, and do by these presents erect the said town and borough into a city. The name city in every case signifies the location of a bishop's see. That's S-E-E, the bishop's see. The seat of his authority, from the Latin sedes, Latin word for chair, and the territory under his supervision. No place in England was called a city unless governed by a bishop, as in the see or city of Canterbury, the see or city of York, the see or city of London, of Bath and Wells, of Bristol, of Salisbury, etc. With the Philadelphia Charter, Penn erected for the persecuting Church of England a nearly invisible mechanism for recycling the very victims of its persecutions. Take that in for a second. The Church of England persecutes people, drives them to leave England, cross the Atlantic, establish a new home, and then they get subverted again by the same Church of England and persecuted over here. This is what, I've talked about this occasionally, not recently, but the difference between high church and low church is crucial. When we're talking about the Church of England, you know, the Church of England was imposed upon the people of England. It wasn't a voluntary thing. We want to have a new church. Let's get Archbishop Laud to make some great rules for us. No, it was imposed. And that imposition now is brought over to the United States or to the colonies to continue to imposing itself, not through the government or force of arms, but through the pulpit and the encouragement of that deference to the imperial nobility and elite status of someone who is a proprietor, aka a prince. Pardon me. Have a glance at the chat. How's everybody? Casuistry. That's right. That's one of the words you learn in this course. You have to pass the final exam. You have to be able to define the word casuistry. Hey, mobster, what you got there? Dull's maternal ancestors were under tank of Limerick. Well-known Quaker family. Interesting. Yeah, well, sorry about whatever goes on in Hollywood and Alec Baldwin land. It's not nothing I can do about it. No, Tyrone, good to have you back, buddy. Good to have everyone here. Thanks for being with me on a Friday night. And I'm sporting my new red shirt. Yeah, it's my birthday shirt. Oops, my book fall down. Have you guys got your book yet? It's on Amazon. It's 17.95 on Amazon. It's nice. It's nicely printed. But the main thing is, this is how you get to know my dad. This is the product of my 5, 6, even if you wish, call it 10 years work. And the uh, the hope is that by studying what happened to my family, to my dad, my by giving this story out to you guys, that we can help other people understand that this deep state thing is real, and it does, interfere with people's lives and even terminate people's lives in order to serve its narrative, its own internal narrative. And one of the reasons that I'm reading this book tonight, frankly, is to continue my exploration of who are the authors of this horrible narrative in which my father's life was taken early in nefarious ways. But this is a record of his service more than anything about how he was killed. That book has not been written yet because I don't have enough facts. But I do know that the things I wrote in here are true and based upon thousands of hours of research. So enough said. I do hope that you'll get your own copy of this book from Amazon, please. That's the only place you can get it right now. I know we're hoping to find another source, but right now, please just go right ahead and use Amazon. It won't hurt you. Thank you. Okay, I didn't mean to get off on that though. Let's get back to our book. Oh, I was going to reset the book. Yeah, that was Andy DeBala did the layout on this book. Beautiful job, Andy. Thanks so much, and great working with Andy to put the text together with the pictures and line it all up. Great job, Andy. Thank you so much. Okay, back to the book. We're in the chapter called Lorenzo Ricci's War, Ricci, also spelled Richey in English, as he was also called Lawrence Ricci when he was in London. And he is, or going to be shortly, the superior general of the Society of Jesus, also known as the Black Pope. Penn erected for the persecuting Church of England a nearly invisible mechanism for recycling the very victims of its persecutions. Indeed, Penn's last will and testament, which became effective with his death in England in 1718 at the age of 74, turned all Pennsylvania into the same mechanism with these words, quote, "The government of my province of Pennsylvania and territories thereunto belonging, and all powers relating thereto, I give and devise to the most honorable the Earl of Oxford and Earl Mortimer and their heirs upon trust to dispose of thereof to Queen Anne or to any other person to the best advantage and profit they can." With a single stroke of pen's quill, the children of the Quakers who had followed him out of the Church of England were literally given back. To become free of this bondage, the Quakers were obliged to align themselves with the Church of Rome, at least the Black Papacy. This alliance was facilitated by Benjamin Franklin, whose political career was built on defending the Quaker interests against the proprietary heirs, which were the Church of England. Against the common enemy, Franklin and the Quakers united, knowingly or unknowingly, with the designs of the Roman Catholic Church militant. This is huge. This idea is absolutely huge, that Franklin, in order to prosecute the needs and rights of his people, the Quakers, against the Church of England, represented by these proprietors and the Earl of Oxford, the Honorable Earl of Oxford, sorry, most honorable Earl, sorry, Earl, once again, but anyway, whatever you call them, these guys are the proprietary side. These are the Church of England side. And so, as in Ireland later in the same century, we find the Presbyterians uniting with the Catholics against the British crown. Here we have the Quakers uniting with the Catholics against the British crown. While these stones rolled unstoppably toward their objective, Jesuit General Luigi Centurioni died. Early in May of 1758, the general congregation arrived at Rome to choose his successor. On the last day of the month, the congregation unanimously elected Lorenzo Ricci, the society's spiritual father and secretary, as its 18th Black Pope. Ricci, a professor of philosophy, theology, and the classics at the Roman College, was known for his patient, placid nature, his even temper. He inherited an organization in remarkably good shape. The Latin American missions were flourishing. A mission had just been established in Poland. Everywhere, the schools and colleges were prospering. In the natural sciences, Jesuits were counted among the world's leading authorities. Their presence in economic and secular government had never been more imposing, and the papal nuncio to Vienna stated in a letter to his superior at the Vatican, quote, "The Jesuits have the upper hand over everything, even the most prominent ministers of state, and domineer over them if they do not carry out their will," unquote. But the Society's legendary power could hinder Catholic activity in the Protestant missions. To defeat Great Britain without a battle, Lorenzo Ricci required the abilities and resources of an important Maryland family, the Carrolls. The three Carroll sons, Daniel, John, and their first cousin Charles, all now in their 20s, had been trained in Jesuit warfare at St. Omer. John was teaching there. Charles was studying law at the Jesuit college Louis le Grand in Paris, about to undertake further studies at London's Inner Temple. Of Daniel's activities between 1753 and 1781, very little is known. What is well known is that the Carroll lads were among the wealthiest Americans alive. The mother of Daniel and John, Eleanor Darnall, claimed direct descent from the Calverts, the owning family of original Maryland. And by the way, I'm going to insert here, for those of you who are familiar with his lordship's kindness, that was a Darnall family property, as well as Darnall's Chance, which is still there in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, where I practiced law for many, many years. So these places still exist. She had come into possession of much of the land that Daniel would transfer to the District of Columbia. Charles Carroll stood to inherit America's largest private estate. Later, John Adams would label him America's richest citizen. Charles Carroll. Lorenzo Ricci could not win his war without the overt participation of the Carrolls, but New England was virulently Protestant. What Protestant leader would stoop to cooperate with devout Roman Catholics schooled in trickery by the all-powerful Jesuits? Would uniting with Jesuits not be laying America's future at the feet of the Bishop of Rome? In this consensus, Ricci was able to discern a valuable negative weapon. If the stones of envy and hatred were given a gentle nudge, their own weight and momentum could spectacularly blast the Society of Jesus to smithereens. With the society out of the way, Roman Catholicism would hang in the wind defenseless. To a Protestant's perception, the church would no longer be a forceful contender for political power. Sun Tzu advised a ruse known in the lingo of modern covert professionals as blown cover as cover. Quote, there will be times when you will lower yourself, and others when you pretend to be afraid. Sometimes you will feign weakness so that your enemies, opening the door to presumption and pride, will come to attack you unwisely. Give out false information about the state you are in. The enemy, believing it to be true, will act in consequence toward his generals and all the officers presently in his service. Yet, yes, suddenly misfortune would bless the society. Weakness and persecution would be transformed into magnificent new capital for building sympathetic relationships with other weak and persecuted people, such as the British colonists were destined soon to become. Without detailing his strategy, for Sun Tzu says, you will not act in such a way that those who are inferior to you can never guess your intentions. Lorenzo Ricci affirmed to the general congregation that storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. The congregation summarily gave its understanding and obedience to the hidden design of their new superior general, who occupied, after all, the place of Jesus. It issued a call for esprit to the brotherhood at large. Quote, if God permitting it because of his hidden designs, which we could do nothing else but adore, we are to become the butt of adversity. The Lord will not abandon those who remain attached and united to him, and as long as the society is able to go to him with an open soul and a sincere heart, no other source of strength will be necessary for it. The Prime Minister of Portugal, Sebastian the Marquis de Pombal, had been conducting what the New Catholic Encyclopedia calls a long campaign of calumnies, false rumors, distorted manipulation of incidents, all intent on undermining the Jesuits' reputation by ascribing to them nefarious doctrines, purposes, and practices. Among Pombal's allegations were that the Jesuits had incited revolts in Paraguay, had traded illegally, had even conspired to murder the king. Pombal supported his claim with numerous anti Jesuit tracts and inflammatory pastoral letters, which he submitted to Parliament. In the Society's defense, a group of bishops showered Pope Clement XIII with letters commending the Jesuits for their invaluable work. Clement, known by Jesuit historians as, quote, a Jesuited Pope, hastened to send copies of these endorsements to Lorenzo Ricci for publication under the title Catholic Ecclesiastical Judgment for the Present Status of the Society of Jesus. Publication of these endorsements would show the world that the society enjoyed the solid support of the Roman hierarchy. Significantly, Ricci declined to publish them. On January 19, 1759, the Marquis de Pombal procured a royal decree expelling the Jesuits from Portugal and its overseas colonies. More than 1,000 Jesuit fathers were crammed into ships and dumped on the shores of the Papal States, which was then an area in central Italy, only slightly more spacious than Switzerland. 250 fathers were cast into dungeons, many perishing from maltreatment. The Portuguese crown seized all the society's houses, churches, and colleges as well. Stones were then nudged in France. The superior of a Jesuit mission in the Caribbean, Père Lavalette, had obtained commercial credit to finance his mission in Martinique. When it happened that he could no longer pay his debt, a trading firm in Marseille alleged damages against him of more than 2 million francs. Lavalette asked Lorenzo Ricci for help. Ricci turned him down. The firm sued the society in a French court and won. Ricci then appealed the case to the Parlement in Paris, which was more of a supreme court than a legislative body. His lawyers argued that the society could not be held liable for personal debts of its members due to a prohibition laid down by St. Ignatius himself in the constitutions against any members doing business as a principal or partner. Although this claim was easily dismissible as a flimsy legal fiction, the court demanded evidence to support it. This required Lorenzo Ricci to produce the constitutions, which had never been before publicly revealed. When the volumes were brought to court and examined, the government attorneys had a field day. A lawyer from Brittany, named Le Châtelet, charged that the constitutions was a handbook of every known form of heresy, idolatry, and superstition, which provides tutelage in suicide, legicide, blasphemy, and every kind of impurity, usury, sorcery, murder, cruelty, hatred, vendetta, insurrection, and treason. As the Lavalette case unfolded during 1759 and 60, Benjamin Franklin's beloved Voltaire slammed the Jesuits in two satirical plays mounted on the Parisian stage. Educated in the humanities and theatrical arts by Jesuits at the Collège Louis le Grand, Voltaire served the society and the Catholic Church with distinction by becoming their chief critic and debunker, much in the way Will Rogers served Franklin Roosevelt's administration by lampooning the New Deal policies, or in the way Keystone Cops tickled an America being transformed into a police state. Ooh, you didn't see that one coming, did you? The Keystone Cops, I thought they were just fun. Pre-programming, folks. Yeah, the use of the media to plant suggestions in the mind. A Jesuit idea, as traced by our author, Tupper Saucy, in earlier chapters of this book that we've been reading, Rulers of Evil. Audiences at Candide howled at Jesuit buffoons strutting about self-importantly drilling their Paraguayan Indian troops. In The Account of the Sickness, Confession, Death, and Apparition of the Jesuit Berthier, the editor of a Jesuit literary review who dies of sheer boredom challenges the notion that the society is even worthy of existence. With his predecessor Blaise Pascal, whose provincial letters had alerted earlier generations to the egomania of high Jesuitry, Voltaire provided a spirit of ridicule, which gave Jesuit bashing the feel of good sport. Yes, Voltaire. Well, I won't go there. We'll talk about Voltaire. We should do a whole show on Voltaire one time. Lorenzo Ricci's handling of the Lavalette case resulted in a resolution passed by Parliament on August 6, 1762, condemning the Jesuits as endangering the Christian faith, disturbing the peace of the church, and in general building up far less than they destroy. The resolution continued, quote, "The Society of Jesus, by its very nature, is inadmissible in any properly ordered state, as contrary to natural law, attacking all temporal and spiritual authority, and tending to introduce into church and state, under the specious veil of a religious institute, not an order truly aspiring toward evangelical perfection, but rather a political organization, whose essence consists in a continual activity by all sorts of ways, direct and indirect, secret and public, to gain absolute independence and then usurpation of all authority. They outrage the laws of nature and, as enemies of the laws of France, should be irrevocably expelled. You know, whenever I hear something that resonates with President Kennedy's Secret Society speech, I almost get chills. But here you have the Jesuits, whose essence consists in a continual activity by all sorts of ways, direct and indirect, secret and public. You know, instead of armies by day, guerrillas by night. That's a resonance for me. How's everybody doing? I've been reading and not looking at the chat, just indulge myself for a moment to see how's everybody doing. Please, I know a little of Voltaire. Yeah, let's get to Voltaire, Baker. By the way, you were the one that reminded me of Thomas Milton Rivers and how important I really want Mark Kulak to take a look at him and put him into his place among Mark's great biographies and research. Louis XV, being an absolute monarch, parliamentary resolutions were worthless without his signature. Louis being obedient to his Jesuits, it was highly unlikely that he would ever sign a resolution condemning the Jesuits. Yet sign it he did. And why he did has remained a point of debate. Some say his mistress, Madame de Pompadour, craved vengeance against court Jesuits for implacably denying her a mass. Others say the king needed Parliament's favor to bail him out of debt. I submit that Louis signed because Lorenzo Ricci wanted him to. When the resolution became law, Ricci released the French Jesuits from their vows. The society as an institution ceased to exist on French soil. Louis consented to allow the Jesuits to remain in France, but as regular clergy, quote unquote. Others went into exile. Père Lavalette, whose financial problems had brought on the debacle, was exiled by Ricci to live the rest of his life as a private citizen in England. When the war that had begun in the Ohio Valley reached Martinique, the English occupied that tiny island and took over the Jesuit plantations, selling them, slaves and all, for more than enough money to have paid off Lavalette's debts. Slaves and all. Yes, the Jesuits owned slaves. Yes, the Jesuits owned slaves here in Maryland. Yes, the Jesuits owned slaves in Georgetown. Yes, that issue is still not resolved. In the midst of their decomposing glory, the Jesuits received from Clement XIII an awesome gift designed to make welcome the most humiliating of circumstances. This was the Mass and Office of the Sacred Heart, with its icon of a realistically bloody heart plucked from Christ's rib cage and ignited by an eternal flame. Based on visions resulting from the spiritual exercises made by Saint Margaret Marie Alacoque, as promoted by her Jesuit spiritual director Claude de la Colombière, Sacred Heart is a Gnostic Jesuit production centering on the Savior's perfect humanity. Quote, by devotion to my heart, Jesus supposedly revealed to Alacoque, Tepid souls shall grow fervent, and fervent souls shall quickly mount to high perfection. Sacred Heart summons true believers to pay a debt of, quote, reparation for the world's sins. The debt is payable only by prayers, penances, masses, and, significantly for this epoch in the society's history, social action. John Carroll, so indispensable for the outworking of the American Revolution, was profoundly devoted to Sacred Heart. If you're not Catholic, you may not have encountered it, but you've probably seen it casually. It really looks like a heart with a flame, and I think I've seen thorns around it. Maybe not, but at any rate, this is the source of it from Clement XIII in 1762 or so. Very interesting that is called Gnostic. And, that's the first word, of the two words that we've got to know. Gnostic is the first one. And Gnostic means that a human being doesn't need God to understand the universe. That by knowledge, by acquiring secret knowledge, and here you can go into all kinds of directions like the Kabbalah and stuff like that, but acquiring secret knowledge, wisdom, you know, wisdom, give me wisdom, then I will have secret knowledge. Then I can sort out things. The trouble with that, of course, is that it violates Rule 1, which just says, don't eat from the truth, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because if you do that, then you're trying to become a god, and you're going to make mistakes because you're not a god. Okay, back to the book. Sorry, you guys might disagree with my interpretation of Genesis there, but there it is. Don't judge, lest ye be judged. Don't pretend you know eternal things like good and evil. We're only human. Louis XV was the effective head of the Family Compact, an agreement between reigning Bourbon monarchs to present a united front before the rest of the world on important measures. Once he had dissolved the Jesuits in France, he advised other Bourbons to do likewise. Although he could not name anything to be gained politically, economically, or financially by the society's dissolution, the issue, quote, still remains puzzling and problematic. Professor Malachi Martin says, unless considered in light of Sun Tzuan ruse. At any rate, the Bourbon, Charles III of Spain, followed Louis's advisory. Charles convened a special commission to prepare a master plan for ousting the Jesuits. No one could produce any hard evidence against the society, but there were plenty of rumors. A mob that had risen up to protest the law Charles had passed forbidding the wearing of wide sombreros was said to have been fomented by Jesuits. A rumor swept across Spain that the Jesuits were nursing a plot to assassinate Charles. The Jesuits supposedly had proof that the king was technically a bastard and should be deposed. None of these rumors were ever substantiated. Moreover, General Ricci ordered the Jesuits to do nothing to dispel them. The result was that 46 of the 60 Spanish bishops decided that Spain should follow the Marquis de Pombal and oust the society. And so the commission drafted an expulsion order, which Charles signed on February 27, 1767. The order was executed by ambush, reminiscent of Philip IV's move against the Knights Templars in 1312. Charles sent out sealed envelopes marked, quote, not to be opened before sunrise of April the 2nd on pain of death, to all provincial viceroys and military commanders. When sunrise came and the recipients opened their envelopes, they discovered two letters inside. The first ordered them to place troops around the Jesuit residences and colleges during the night of April the 2nd to arrest all Jesuits and to arrange for them to be placed aboard waiting ships at certain docks. Quote, if a single Jesuit, concluded the king, even though sick or dying, is still to be found in the area under your command after the embarkation, prepare yourself to face summary execution. Unquote. The second letter was a copy of King Charles's original order of expulsion, which began, being swayed by just and legitimate reasons which shall remain sealed within my royal breast forever, and went on to say that all members of the Society of Jesus are to leave my kingdoms, Castile, Aragon, Navarre, and the other formerly independent kingdoms that made up Spain, and all their goods are declared forfeit by virtue of the higher power which the Lord God Almighty has confided into my hands. The king made sure to discourage any investigation into causes. It is not for subjects to question the wisdom or to seek to interpret the decisions of their sovereign. Only days before April 2nd, the Spanish ambassador to the Holy See presented a document from Charles to the Pope that explained, quote, your holiness knows as well as anyone that a sovereign's first duty is to ensure the peace of his dominions and the tranquility of his subjects. In the fulfillment of this sovereign task, I have found it my duty to expel all the Jesuits residing in my kingdoms and to commit them directly to your holiness's wise stewardship in the states of the church. I beg your holiness to consider that my decision is unalterable and has been made as the result of mature reflection and all due consideration for the consequences. Clement, the likelihood of whose submission to the will of Lorenzo Ricci should not be underestimated, responded in a melodramatic vein as though playing for an audience. Of all the shocks I've had to endure in the 9 unhappy years of my pontificate, this one, of which your majesty has informed me, is the worst. The Pope had little more to say, except that the king may have placed himself in danger of eternal damnation. The order was executed during the night of April 2nd and 3rd. Some 6,000 Jesuits were rounded up throughout Spain. They were crammed into the lower decks of 22 warships. In May 1767, the gruesome fleet appeared off Civitavecchia, the port of the Papal States, and, amazingly, was fired upon by shore artillery. The ships were denied permission to land their human cargo by order of the Pope himself, pursuant to a conference with Lorenzo Ricci. Historians are at a loss to explain why Clement, so devoted to the Jesuits, would impose such cruelty upon his beloveds in their hour of need. The most plausible answer I would suggest is that his understanding was obedient to the inscrutable command of his general, whose exceedingly private objective, after all, was to disqualify the Society of Jesus and the Roman Catholic Church as viable enemies of Protestantism, at least in the North American colonies. No longer enemies, they could develop personal alliances. The suffering priests, the guns of Civitavecchia, were all explained in Amio's Sun Tzu. Quote, your army, accustomed to not knowing your plans, will be equally unaware of the peril which threatens it. A good general takes advantage of everything, but he can only do that because he has operated in the greatest secrecy, because he knows how to remain cool-headed, and because he governs with uprightness. At the same time, however, his men are constantly misled by what they see and hear. He manages for his troops never to know what they must do, nor what orders they must receive. If his own people are unaware of his plans, how can the enemy discover them? Over the next few months, thousands more Jesuits were expelled from the remaining Bourbon states of Naples, Parma, Malta, and Spanish America. Jesuits in French America, Quebec, and New England were left undisturbed, as were those in Austria. In October 1768, the Austrian Empress Maria Theresa of Habsburg wrote her Jesuit confessor, Father Koffler, quote, my dear father, There is no cause for concern. So long as I am alive, you have nothing to fear, unquote. But Maria Theresa hoped to marry her two daughters to Bourbon princes, Caroline to the son of the Spanish king, Marie Antoinette to the son of Louis XV. Bourbon ambassadors advised her that unless she expelled the Jesuits, she would have to look elsewhere for sons in law. The Empress reneged on her promise to Father Koffler, expelled the Jesuits, and the girls got their men. Marie Antoinette's marriage would end with the execution of her husband, Louis XVI, in January 1793. 9 months later, she would die the same way, decapitated by the guillotine. This device bears the name of the French revolutionist who, in 1792, first suggested its use in administering the death penalty, Dr. Joseph Guillotine. Dr. Guillotine, or I should say Guillotin, I suppose, was a disestablished Jesuit. In January 1769, the ambassadors from France, Spain, and Portugal visited Clement XIII to demand the complete and utter suppression of the Society of Jesus. Clement called for a special consistory of the College of Cardinals to deliberate the question, but when the cardinals convened February the 3rd, it was not to discuss Bourbon ultimatums, but to choose Clement's successor, for the 76-year-old pope had died the night before, quote, of an apoplectic attack, unquote, said the official record, a heart attack attributed to the pressures applied by Bourbon diplomats. For nearly 3 months, one question charged the turbulent conclave: should the next pope be for or against the Jesuits? The cardinal's choice of Lorenzo Ganganelli was a triumph for Lorenzo Ricci. Although Ganganelli was a Franciscan, he had colleagued with Jesuits as a special consultant to the Inquisition. His celebrated book, Diatriba Theologica, 1743, had been dedicated to Ignatius Loyola. Moreover, Ganganelli literally owed his papacy to Lorenzo Ricci, as it was Ricci who had sponsored his nomination for cardinal in 1759. Almost immediately after receiving the red hat, Ganganelli had shown evidence of cooperating with General Ricci's strategy of gradually disestablishing the Society of Jesus. Oxford Book of Popes indicates a sudden and unexplainable habit change. Quote, hitherto regarded as a friend of the Jesuits, Cardinal Ganganelli now distanced himself from them. And now, a decade later, calling himself Clement XIV, Ganganelli presented what the Catholic Encyclopedia calls, in appearance, a hostile attitude toward the Jesuits, an apparent hostility, a theatrical hostility that masked and involved loyalty toward the society. Clement XIV would do whatever was necessary to help the society win victory without doing battle, even if it meant obliterating the society. The Bourbons needed appeasing. Hastily, Clement promised Charles III of Spain forthcoming documents necessary to proclaim to all the world the wisdom of your Majesty's decision to expel the Jesuits. He assured Louis XV of France also of a plan for the complete suppression of the society. On Maundy Thursday, 1770, Clement omitted the annual reading of In Cena Domine, or On the Lord's Supper. The omission was an astonishing statement. This celebrated bull, first proclaimed in 1568 by Pope Pius V, arrogantly reminded kings that they were but vassals of the papacy. Suddenly discontinuing this assertion flattered the royal self-importance, inviting crowned heads to stay on the anti-Jesuit, anti-church tack, so necessary for the fulfillment of Ricci's secret designs in England and America. It surely evidences Clement's involvement in the strategy of feigned weakness in order to conceal what Sun Tzu called an order that nothing can interrupt. The non-reading of In Cena Domine rang the death knell of the strong-armed white papacy as manifest by Ricci's political theorist Justinius Febronius in his 1763 masterpiece, quote, On the State of the Church and the Legitimate Power of the Roman Pontiff. For more than 80 years, the papacy had supported Rome-based members of the Stuart monarchs, exiled from England for being Roman Catholics. Not only did Clement XIV diminish this tradition to almost nothing, in 1772 he began extending a highly visible and most cordial hospitality to the Protestant King George III and his family. This tableau was enormously disturbing to American Protestants, who at that time were having extreme difficulties with George. The prospect of England reuniting with Rome gave them all the more reason to strive for what Lorenzo Ricci wanted, their independence. Finally, on July 21st, 1773, Clement XIV delivered on his promise by signing the brief Dominus ac Redemptor Noster, God and our Redeemer. The brief, quote, dissolved, suppressed, disbanded, and abolished the Society of Jesus for all eternity, so as to establish a real and enduring peace within the Church. All the Jesuits' offices, authorities, and functions were declared null and void, and all their houses, colleges, hospices, and any other places occupied by them to be hereby disestablished, no matter in what province, state, or kingdom they might be found. Clement appointed 5 cardinals, 2 theologians, and other ecclesiastical dignitaries to supervise the disestablishment. None of the confiscated Jesuit records, correspondence, and accounts showed any incriminating evidence. Although Ricci lived a short walk from the Pope's palace at St. Peter's, notice of the disestablishment was not served upon him. Guards took the general into custody at his offices in number 45 Piazza del Gesù. They removed him to the English college a few blocks away. He remained there 5 weeks. Things were then happening in England and America that made Ricci's presence in the English college extraordinarily significant. Toward the end of September, Lorenzo Ricci was taken from the English college to Castel Sant'Angelo, a medieval fortress whose dungeons suggest a prison. His detention was probably less demeaning than we might imagine, as Sant'Angelo contained quite elegant rooms. Popes often used them as a convenient resort from the administrative stresses. In fact, a secret underground tunnel connected Sant'Angelo to the papal palace at the Vatican. It would be consistent with Lorenzo Ricci's position and strategy for him to stay in personal, secret contact with Clement XIV by means of this tunnel. On September 22nd, 1774, the first anniversary of Ricci's detention at Sant'Angelo, Clement died. He was 69. He had suffered for the last year of his life in severe depression, it was said, with morbid paranoia over assassination. His corpse decomposed rapidly, feeding rumors of death by poison. Rumors which his famous last words tended to confirm, quote, mercy, mercy, compulsus feci, unquote. I was compelled to do it. For many years afterward, historians would wonder just whom Gagnanelli was addressing. God? A vengeful Jesuit? Ricci? What was the it he was compelled to do? Disestablish the Jesuits? Commit suicide? The definitive answer may never be known because the Pope's personal papers and effects decomposed as rapidly as his flesh. What is quite known, though, is that the death of Clement XIV, in the words of Oxford Book of Popes, quote, brought the prestige of the papacy to its lowest level in centuries, which is precisely what Lorenzo Ricci needed for his American Revolution to happen. We now proceed to examine the structured darkness of the men who led the attack against the Society of Jesus. It was the same darkness from whence came not only the Englishmen who turned their kingdom into a hated tyranny, but also the Americans who advocated rebellion against that tyranny. The darkness is called Freemasonry, and it is the subject of our next chapter. Okay. That brings us to chapter 13, The Secret Bridge, and also to 8:59 p.m. here on the East Coast. So, well, let's see what's been going on in the chat room. Found the paperwork. Okay, so you guys, when it says Macduff lives, that's Andy posting. I found the paperwork behind the synthetic bat coronavirus created by Barrick and Company in 2008. Watch my show tonight live with Andy. Everybody, watch Andy tonight live with Andy on YouTube. Yeah, Andy has been finding some terrific stuff. So let's catch up with him tonight at 10 p.m. Thanks for being with me, and have the rest of the weekend. I hope is a pleasant and enjoyable one for you. Going to be out doing a little yard work myself.